Welcome back to the channel. If you're here late at night looking for a story to drift off to, you're in the right place. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. I'm also curious, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? Now settle in, get comfortable, let the world slow down.
Ethan Marlowe had never known the comfort of certainty. Born in the outskirts of a sprawling industrial city, he grew up in a cramped apartment with peeling paint and a persistent draft that whispered through the walls in winter. His father worked two jobs, a factory line and a late-night taxi shift, while his mother stitched together a patchwork of freelance jobs to pay the bills. Money was always short, and the tension in the household was a constant hum, barely audible but always felt. Despite this, Ethan developed a fascination with ideas larger than life, dreams that stretched far beyond the gray brick streets of his childhood. While other kids were collecting comic books or baseball cards, he collected notions, tiny sparks of entrepreneurial insight that he scribbled in notebooks, sometimes in the margins of school books, sometimes on scraps of newspaper or receipts. School was another battlefield. Ethan struggled with dyslexia, and letters seemed to rebel against his eyes, twisting into shapes that refused to form words. Teachers called him slow. Peers mocked him mercilessly. But Ethan's failures were merely surface cracks, hiding a core of relentless curiosity. He learned to listen instead of read, to observe patterns in human behavior, and to recognize opportunities where others saw chaos. It wasn't long before he realized that the world rewarded those who could see differently, even if they didn't fit into its conventional molds. By the age of 16, Ethan had taught himself basic coding from library books and free online courses. He experimented with small projects, building websites for local businesses, offering marketing advice to neighborhood stores, sometimes earning enough to buy a sandwich or a secondhand book. The money was trivial, but the thrill of creation was intoxicating. He discovered early that vision alone wasn't enough. Execution mattered. Persistence mattered. This was the first lesson he would carry into the maelstrom of his adult life. After high school, Ethan took a gap year, traveling across the country with a backpack and a notebook, documenting ideas he believed could change the way people worked, lived, and connected. He observed cafes filled with freelancers hunched over laptops, small businesses squeezed into overpriced rentals, and office spaces lying empty for weeks while startups struggled to find temporary workstations. To most, these were mundane observations, mere patterns of city life, but to Ethan, it was a problem begging for a solution. By the time he enrolled at Emerson University to study business, Ethan had already sketched the blueprint for what would become his signature vision, a network of communal workspaces designed not just for efficiency, but for human connection. Unlike traditional offices where isolation and hierarchy dominated, these spaces would blend work, community, and lifestyle. Cafes would sit alongside conference rooms. Rooftop gardens would offer places to breathe and meet. There would be mentorship programs, workshops, and shared resources, creating a living ecosystem where creativity and collaboration flourished. Ethan called the concept haven work, a haven for workers, thinkers, and dreamers alike. At Emerson, Ethan's ideas attracted curiosity, but also skepticism. Professors were polite but cautious. Classmates called him a dreamer, a showboat, someone who talked in big numbers and grandiose schemes without substance to back them up. But Ethan was unshaken. He thrived on the friction. Every critique sharpened his argument. Every doubt hardened his resolve. By his junior year, he had convinced his best friend, Daniel Wu, a quiet but brilliant coder, to join him in building a prototype workspace in a rundown warehouse near the university. The first haven work was modest, A converted factory floor with mismatched chairs, scuffed desks, and an overenthusiastic cafe barista who doubled as a receptionist. Ethan worked day and night, painting walls, negotiating furniture rentals, and pitching the concept to anyone who would listen. The first tenants were skeptical freelancers and a handful of startups too poor to afford traditional office leases. But the energy in the space was undeniable. People lingered, talked, and collaborated. They posted ideas on whiteboards, stayed late to help each other, and began to feel a sense of belonging that extended beyond the work itself. Word spread quickly. Students, freelancers, and small business owners began to flock to Havenwork. By the end of the first year, Ethan and Daniel had doubled the number of workstations, improved amenities, and established a membership model that allowed flexible leasing options. This flexibility, Ethan argued, was the key to the future of work. Traditional office leases were rigid, expensive, and uninviting. Havenwork offered freedom, accessibility, and community, a trifecta that startups craved. Despite early success, financial stability remained elusive. The project ran on thin margins, and Ethan frequently went without pay to cover rent, utilities, and maintenance. Investors were wary, seeing only the instability and risk of an untested model. But Ethan had a gift for persuasion. He could speak with such conviction, blending data, vision, and charisma, that even the most skeptical would hesitate to say no. At 22, he closed a modest round of angel investment from a local entrepreneur who believed in vision over immediate profit. With the infusion, Havenwork expanded into 3 additional locations across the city. As the company grew, so did Ethan's ambition. He was no longer content with just building workspaces. He wanted to reshape the urban experience itself. The idea of vertical campuses emerged, multi-story buildings combining offices, cafes, fitness centers, childcare, and social spaces. Havenwork would become a city within a city, a self-contained ecosystem that allowed people to live, work, and grow without stepping outside the community. It was audacious, perhaps insane, but that was Ethan's trademark. He did not settle for incremental change. He aimed to redefine the rules entirely. It was during this period that Ethan's personal life began to intertwine with his professional ambitions. He met Lydia Vance at a charity gala organized by one of Havenwork's early investors. Lydia, born into old money family, was striking, graceful, intelligent, and acutely aware of social dynamics. Unlike many socialites, she possessed a sharp business mind and an appreciation for strategy, which made her immediately intrigued by Ethan's vision. To Ethan, she represented both a partner and a challenge. Winning her attention required more than charm. It required audacity and creativity. Over a series of months, Ethan pursued Lydia with the same energy and strategy he applied to his ventures. He invited her to pilot projects, shared detailed plans of the vertical campus concept, and sought her advice on expansion strategies. Lydia was cautious but fascinated. She saw in Ethan not only a dreamer, but a man who could convert imagination into tangible results. By the time Havenwork had opened its 5th location, the two were engaged, forming a partnership that would later become both a power duo and a source of conflict. By 24, Ethan's profile in the city had skyrocketed. Local media called him the architect of modern workspaces and the young visionary changing the way people live and work. Investors began to circle with larger checks. But along with recognition came pressure. Every new project brought risks, financial, legal, and operational. The mistakes of small mismanagement could escalate into disasters. Ethan was no stranger to these pressures. In fact, they fueled him. But even he could not foresee the intensity of the storms on the horizon. The defining moment of Part 1 arrived when Ethan pitched Havenwork's first major expansion beyond the city to a high-profile investor, Alexander Chen, whose portfolio dwarfed any local backer. He proposed a global vision, cities across Asia, Europe, and North America connected by a network of communal workspaces, a new urban model combining technology, architecture, and human connection. The budget required was staggering, nearly $1 billion, but Ethan spoke as if it were pocket change. Every word, every gesture radiated conviction. Alexander listened in silence. Unlike other investors, he did not react to charm or narrative alone. He scrutinized Ethan's plan, his financials, and his assumptions. Then, with a quiet but commanding tone, he posed a question. If you fail, how will you survive? Ethan paused, heart racing, then answered without hesitation. I will adapt, I will pivot, and I will ensure that the people who trust me are never left behind. The room was silent. Alexander's interest, once skeptical, had turned to intrigue. Ethan left the meeting knowing the stakes had just escalated beyond anything he had faced. Havenwork had grown from a modest warehouse experiment to the cusp of becoming a global phenomenon. But with ambition came vulnerability. Competitors, operational complexity, and the looming threat of market volatility hung like storm clouds over Ethan's dreams. Yet, for the first time, he felt the thrill of a larger game, one where vision, courage, and audacity could change the world. With Alexander Chen's backing secured, Havenwork exploded onto the global stage. Ethan's vision of vertical campuses became a reality almost overnight. In New York, London, and Hong Kong, towering office buildings were transformed into bustling microcosms of work and life. Rooftop gardens, cafes, gyms, and childcare facilities all blended seamlessly into collaborative spaces where startups thrived and freelancers flourished. Ethan's idea, once dismissed as naive and impractical, had become the blueprint for a new way of working in cities around the world. The expansion was dizzying. Every new building demanded meticulous planning, architectural design, local regulations, staffing, marketing campaigns. Ethan moved like a man possessed, juggling continents over video calls, flight after flight, deal after deal. He immersed himself so fully that he slept in hotel rooms stacked with plans and laptops, living on caffeine and adrenaline. Daniel Wu handled the technical side, ensuring software, booking systems, and internal management tools scaled alongside the company. Their partnership had matured into a rhythm that balanced creativity with precision. Alongside the corporate triumphs came personal milestones. Lydia, now Ethan's fiancée, had moved into a more active role in the company, though not without controversy. She insisted on overseeing branding, aesthetics, and what she called the experience culture, ensuring that every cafe, lounge, and rooftop garden reflected a sense of refinement and elegance. Her influence was visible. Every Havenworks ace now had curated art, designer furniture, and subtle but luxurious touches that made clients feel they were part of an elite community. Their wedding, held on a breezy autumn afternoon atop one of Havenworks' Manhattan campuses, was emblematic of their combined vision. Guests included investors, celebrities, and city dignitaries, all mingling beneath a canopy of twinkling lights. Ethan's speech spoke of community, shared dreams, and the power of collaboration, a manifesto for his company and life alike. Lydia's own words focused on nurturing and growth, presenting herself as the guiding hand behind the empire they were building. It was a ceremony of grandeur, but beneath the glitter lay the first subtle seeds of tension, two ambitious minds converging, yet already sparking friction in vision and control. Despite the personal harmony in public, the couple's approach to business revealed contrasts. Ethan was impulsive but strategic. Lydia was meticulous and controlling. She insisted on every workplace being vegan-friendly, banning meat from all cafeterias, and personally reviewing employee dining habits. For Ethan, the policies were a minor eccentricity, a price worth paying for harmony at home. But for employees, it became a symbol of the increasing rigidity that would later feed resentment. Yet, at the time, these details were overshadowed by the company's unprecedented success. Investor confidence soared. With Alexander Chen's endorsement, Havenworks secured additional rounds of funding totaling over $5 billion. Major cities competed to host new campuses, offering tax incentives and prime real estate. Ethan's charisma and vision, coupled with Lydia's disciplined eye, made them nearly untouchable in the eyes of the business world. Media outlets hailed them as the power couple redefining urban work. Stock valuations, though Havenwork was still private, were rumored to exceed $50 billion, placing them in league with tech giants who had long dominated headlines. With money flowing like a river, lifestyle became an extension of ambition. Private jets ferried Ethan and Lydia across continents, each building unveiling a new display of wealth. Yet Ethan remained connected to the ground level. He would walk through spaces, talking to employees, joining brainstorming sessions, and occasionally delivering impromptu speeches about innovation and collaboration. He understood that optics mattered, but culture mattered more. Employees needed to feel part of something bigger than themselves, a movement, a revolution in work. Havenworks' dominance was not without obstacles. Copycat companies emerged in dozens of cities, mimicking the communal office model with varying degrees of success. Ethan's competitive instincts flared. He responded by aggressively acquiring smaller competitors, often outbidding them for prime locations. Each acquisition was framed as strategic consolidation, yet behind closed doors, deals involved intricate arrangements, property leasing, and sometimes personal guarantees. Daniel handled the technical logistics, but the financial complexity grew exponentially, pushing both co-founders to the edge of endurance. By 2025, Havenwork had become a global powerhouse, with locations in over 50 countries and a presence in the most expensive real estate markets. Investors celebrated Ethan as a visionary capable of turning the intangible into tangible wealth. Yet cracks were beginning to appear. Rapid expansion meant financial oversight lagged behind ambition. While revenue grew, expenses grew faster. Buildings cost millions to maintain, employee benefits ballooned, and high-profile acquisitions were financed through layered debt arrangements. Ethan's personal life mirrored this complexity. Lydia, empowered by her role and increasingly wealthy in her own right, began creating side projects using Havenwork resources. She launched WeFit, a chain of boutique gyms attached to campuses, We Grow, an educational initiative for children of employees, and We Sleep, a project focused on luxury furniture for private and corporate spaces. Initially, Ethan supported these ventures, viewing them as brand extensions, but as the projects expanded, their costs began to spiral, feeding subtle tensions in financial strategy versus personal indulgence. Their wealth allowed for extravagant indulgences. They purchased mansions in multiple countries, stocked private art collections, and chartered yachts for retreats and celebrations. Yet amidst luxury, Ethan's focus remained on Havenworks' cultural ecosystem, keeping employees engaged, ambitious, and above all, loyal. He believed loyalty could be engineered, not merely earned. He often reminded his leadership team that morale was the most valuable asset a company could possess. Yet this philosophy would soon be tested. Challenges intensified in unexpected ways. Some employees began pushing back against Lydia's strict policies, particularly her insistence on veganism and lifestyle controls within workplaces. Others grew frustrated with the pace of expansion, reporting burnout and overstretched resources. Rumors of insider dealings, insider trading, personal properties leased back to the company, side projects funded through corporate funds, and extravagant personal expenses recorded as operational costs surfaced. Ethan largely ignored whispers, convinced they were noise amidst the symphony of growth. The real shock came from an external source. In early 2026, a global investment firm expressed interest in Havenworks' IPO, proposing a valuation of nearly $500 billion. The opportunity was immense. Public funding could solidify global dominance and provide liquidity for personal wealth. Yet the IPO process exposed vulnerabilities that had long been hidden beneath the company's glowing exterior. Auditors discovered inconsistencies in financial statements, questions about related party transactions, and gaps in oversight on Lydia's side ventures. Investors began to hesitate. The tension reached a boiling point during a critical board meeting. Ethan, usually composed, found himself defending the couple's decisions before a room of wary executives. Lydia, seated beside him, exuded confidence, yet her detachment from practical financial scrutiny became glaringly apparent. Questions about funding We Grow, We Fit, and We Sleep were met with vague assurances. The board's patience was fraying. Rumors leaked to the press, painting Havenwork not as a revolutionary company, but as a gilded empire teetering on mismanagement. It was during this period that a quiet figure emerged, Daniel Wu. Long overshadowed by Ethan's charisma and Lydia's influence, he observed the escalating chaos with growing concern. Daniel had never sought the spotlight. He had been content to let Ethan lead. Yet the IPO revelations, combined with financial and operational risks, made it clear that without intervention, the company could collapse. Quietly, he began documenting irregularities, preparing to raise concerns to both the board and regulators. Meanwhile, the global pandemic in 2027 arrived like a hammer blow. Remote work became the default, and the demand for physical communal spaces plummeted. Occupancy rates fell across the board, leaving millions of dollars in revenue unrealized. Havenworks' ambitious expansion suddenly became a liability. Multi-million-dollar leases, side projects, and operational costs could no longer be sustained. Investors panicked, and rumors of financial insolvency spread like wildfire. Ethan, for the first time in his career, felt the grip of helplessness tighten. Public perception shifted almost overnight. Media outlets ran headlines like Havenwork from visionary startup to hollow giant and the Marlowe Empire, vanity over value. Employees who once admired Ethan's charisma and Lydia's meticulous oversight now whispered about layoffs, missed payrolls, and deteriorating conditions. For years, loyalty had been bought with promises of stock options, perks, and a community spirit. Now, those promises were hollow. Meetings that once celebrated innovation and expansion devolved into arguments about austerity measures and unpaid invoices. A few of the most senior staff quietly resigned, taking critical institutional knowledge with them. Ethan remained outwardly confident, refusing to panic. He believed that securing a new round of funding would stabilize the empire, and he personally reached out to every billionaire and hedge fund manager he could think of. Yet each conversation ended the same way, polite refusals or requests for more transparency. When auditors combed through Havenworks' books, they uncovered troubling discrepancies. Side ventures like We Grow, We Fit, and We Sleep had been funded through loans or intercompany transfers that weren't properly accounted for. Real estate deals orchestrated by Ethan and Lydia personally, then leased back to the company, raised legal and ethical red flags. Lydia, once the queen of branding and culture, found herself under scrutiny as well. Her insistence on controlling workplace lifestyle and creating independent ventures using company resources made her appear reckless in the eyes of auditors and investors. The luxurious veneer that once impressed the world now seemed like a facade masking mismanagement. Public perception shifted. Media outlets ran headlines like Havenwork from visionary startup to hollow giant and the Marlowe Empire, vanity over value. In amidst the chaos, Daniel Wu quietly became the company's most important figure. Where Ethan and Lydia were losing control, Daniel meticulously documented every financial transaction, contract, and operational misstep. His reports were precise and damning, highlighting conflicts of interest, misuse of corporate funds, and legal violations that could jeopardize the company's survival. For the first time, Ethan realized that the empire he had built on charisma and bold ideas was vulnerable to the slow, relentless power of accountability. In a desperate attempt to salvage the company, Ethan pushed forward with plans for an IPO, hoping that public funding would infuse the necessary capital to stabilize operations, but auditors and investment banks were unconvinced. The financial records revealed months of cash flow problems, inflated valuations, and side project expenses masquerading as operational costs. The IPO was postponed indefinitely. Wall Street analysts who once admired Ethan's audacity now questioned his competence and integrity. Pressure mounted at home as well. Lydia, emboldened by her own ventures and frustrated by Ethan's inability to stabilize the company, began clashing openly with him. Meetings that once ran smoothly now became battlegrounds, each debate escalating into personal attacks. The grandiose lifestyle they had built, the private jets, villas, theaters, and gyms for employees, became unsustainable under a shrinking revenue stream. For the first time, luxury felt like a trap. The tipping point came when former co-founder and longtime confidant Daniel Wu approached the board directly. Daniel, who had spent years in Ethan's shadow, presented a thorough dossier of mismanagement, conflicts of interest, and potential legal liabilities. He argued that immediate intervention was necessary to prevent the collapse of what remained of Havenworks' assets. The board, already alarmed by the pandemic's impact and investor uncertainty, voted to remove Ethan as CEO. The announcement hit like a shockwave. Ethan, once the undisputed master of his domain, was stripped of authority over the company he had built from nothing. Lydia, too, faced consequences. Her side ventures were audited, contracts terminated, and operational control revoked. The empire's golden sheen faded almost overnight, revealing a tangle of debt, mismanagement, and failed ambitions. Yet Ethan and Lydia were not destitute. Over the years, they had strategically siphoned profits, registered ventures under personal names, and leveraged assets outside of the company's formal structure. When Havenwork was eventually acquired by SoftBank, the couple walked away with billions, even as employees, small investors, and creditors absorbed the losses. Former employees who had labored with dedication under promises of stock options and career advancement were left with meager severance and broken trust. The legal fallout stretched for years. Former employees filed lawsuits for unpaid wages and labor law violations. Investors pursued claims of financial misrepresentation, and regulatory authorities investigated tax and accounting irregularities. Ethan and Lydia defended themselves vigorously, arguing that the collapse was primarily due to unforeseen global events and an overzealous expansion strategy. The litigation created a protracted, messy spectacle, with every detail of the couple's personal and professional life scrutinized in court documents and media coverage. Meanwhile, the world outside moved on. The shared workspace model, once a symbol of innovation and community, had been permanently altered by remote work. Competitors who had survived the pandemic consolidated, but none replicated the scale or ambition of Havenwork. Ethan's vision of vertical campuses blending work, life, and luxury became a cautionary tale, studied in business schools as an example of both brilliance and hubris. Through it all, Ethan retreated from public life. The empire he had built, risen, and lost left him with wealth, but also a profound sense of vulnerability. He and Lydia settled into a quieter existence, traveling between properties, attending private events, and managing their various personal ventures. The thrill of creation and conquest was replaced by the slower rhythms of personal indulgence. Yet, even in retirement, Ethan's mind remained restless, reflecting on every decision, every risk, and every miscalculation that had shaped his life's trajectory. The final lesson crystallized quietly. In a world driven by capital, audacity alone was never enough. Wealth could shield ambition temporarily, but oversight, prudence, and adaptability determined survival. Ethan Marlowe had been a visionary, a risk-taker, and a builder of dreams, but he had also been human, flawed, and vulnerable. His rise had inspired awe, his fall taught caution. Haven work itself continued under new ownership, stripped of personal extravagances, refocused on sustainable operations, and restructured to survive in a changed world. Employees who had weathered the collapse adapted to remote work, some finding new opportunities, others leaving behind the culture Ethan and Lydia had nurtured. The offices, once bustling with life, now functioned as tools for pragmatic business rather than symbols of a golden age vision. Ethan's story became a modern fable, a testament to the intoxicating tower of vision and ambition, and a stark warning of the consequences when human desire, greed, and hubris collide with reality. From a struggling entrepreneur with little to his name to the builder of a global empire and eventual fall from grace, his journey spanned triumph and catastrophe in equal measure. And yet, even in failure, he remained larger than life, a cautionary legend whose story would be told for decades, reminding others that in the game of wealth, the strongest forces are money, timing, and circumstance, not talent or imagination alone. Standing once more on the rooftop of a modest Manhattan apartment, a far cry from the soaring towers he had once commanded, Ethan Marlowe watched the city lights shimmer across the skyline. His empire had crumbled, his legacy tainted, but he remained, resilient and unbroken in spirit. He had built, lost, and survived, and perhaps in some quiet corner of his mind, the next great idea was already stirring, waiting for its moment to rise. The call came in just after sunrise. A construction crew expanding a rural highway outside the town of Red Hollow had struck something their machinery was never meant to touch. At first, they thought it was old debris, maybe animal remains, maybe buried trash from decades ago. But when the foreman bent down and brushed away the dirt with his glove, he saw something unmistakable: a human femur. By noon, the site was sealed off with yellow tape. State troopers stood watch while the construction equipment sat idle, frozen in place like guilty witnesses. The earth around the discovery had been disturbed just enough to reveal that this was not a single bone, but part of something larger, something intentional. This was no accident. By late afternoon, Dr. Evelyn Carter arrived. She didn't wear a lab coat. She never did in the field. Instead, she wore faded jeans, a canvas jacket, and boots stained with years of soil from crime scenes across the country. To most people, bones were remnants of death. To Evelyn, they were records, archives written in calcium and collagen. She was a forensic anthropologist, and this was her language. Evelyn knelt beside the shallow excavation pit as technicians documented the scene. She didn't touch anything yet. She only observed. The angle of exposure, the soil layers, the way the bones had shifted when the machinery scraped across them. "Stop digging," she said quietly. Everyone did. She could already tell this wasn't recent. The bone was dry, weathered. The edges showed no signs of modern tool marks. This body had been here a long time, long enough for the land to forget it. Or try to. Over the next 6 hours, the team worked slowly, carefully, removing soil grain by grain. By nightfall, the outline of a human skeleton began to emerge, mostly intact, carefully placed. Too carefully. Evelyn watched as the skull was uncovered, the jaw still aligned, teeth present, no obvious fractures visible yet, but she knew better than to trust first impressions. "Whoever buried this person," she said to the lead detective, Marcus Hale, "didn't rush." Hale frowned. Meaning? Meaning this wasn't panic. This wasn't someone dumping a body in the dark. This was deliberate, planned. The remains were transported to the state forensic lab under escort. Red Hollow was a small town. News traveled fast, and by morning, rumors had already grown teeth. Some said it was a missing teenager from the 90s. Others whispered about a drifter. A few mentioned names that hadn't been spoken in decades. Inside the lab, the skeleton lay on a stainless steel table beneath soft, even lighting, cleaned, catalogued, and ready to speak. Evelyn began where she always did. First, the basics. The pelvis told her the individual was female. The shape of the sciatic notch was wide. The subpubic angle confirmed it. The skull supported the conclusion, though it was never as reliable on its own. Age came next. She examined the pubic symphysis, the wear patterns subtle but clear to her trained eye. Not young, not elderly. Late 20s, early 30s. Stature followed, measuring the long bones, calculating regression formulas she had memorized years ago. 5'6", maybe 5'7". An adult woman. Cause of death was harder. Bones don't preserve everything. They don't show suffocation. They don't record poison. But they do remember trauma, stress, repetition. And that's when Evelyn noticed the first anomaly. The ribs. 2 on the left side showed healed fractures. Old injuries. Not fatal, but significant. These didn't happen at death. They healed, she documented carefully. What does that tell us? Hale leaned against the lab counter. That she'd been hurt before, more than once, enough for bone to break, enough for it to heal. The story was already forming. This woman had lived with violence. Evelyn moved to the hands. The small bones of the fingers were intact, but one metacarpal showed a faint ridge, a boxer's fracture, common in defensive injuries. She imagined the moment without dramatizing it. A raised arm, a reflex, a blow blocked just enough to spare the skull, but not the hand. Bones didn't lie. They only waited for someone who knew how to listen. Dental records came next. The teeth were well preserved. Some fillings, no major dental work, enough to suggest regular care at some point, but not wealth. Missing persons databases were searched. Dozens of cold cases, hundreds of names. Nothing immediate matched. Then Evelyn reached the skull. She examined the occipital bone carefully, ran gloved fingers along its surface, tilted it toward the light. There it was. A small, circular depression. Not a fracture that radiated outward. No shattering, no cracking. Blunt force trauma. Not enough to kill on its own, but enough to incapacitate. This wasn't an accident, Evelyn said softly. Never is, Hale nodded. Under magnification, faint striations appeared along the edge of the depression, not from the environment, not from excavation. Tool marks. Something cylindrical, something swung. A pipe, a baton, a heavy metal object. This woman hadn't fallen. She'd been struck. Evelyn leaned back, letting the pieces settle. The skeleton before her wasn't just remains, it was testimony, a timeline written into bone density and fracture repair. She dictated her preliminary findings. Female, adult, history of prior physical trauma, fatal cranial injury consistent with blunt force impact, body buried carefully, intentionally. But something else bothered her. The hyoid bone. Often lost, often broken, rarely intact. This one was intact, which means strangulation was unlikely. The killer hadn't used hands. They'd used something else. The lab fell quiet as Evelyn finished her notes. Outside, rain tapped against the windows, soft and persistent. Red Hollow slept, unaware that a story buried beneath its roads was waking up. Hale broke the silence. How long do you think she's been dead? Evelyn considered. Soil chemistry, bone weathering, subtle discoloration. 15 years, maybe more. Hale exhaled slowly. That puts us back in the early 2000s. Evelyn nodded, which means whoever did this thought they got away with it. She looked down at the skeleton again, at the quiet evidence of pain endured and violence survived, until it wasn't. But bones don't forget. They just wait for someone who knows how to listen. And somewhere in Red Hollow, someone who had buried a secret long ago felt for the first time in years a tightening in their chest. Forensic anthropology is often misunderstood. People imagine it as guesswork, as interpretation, as educated speculation. But to those who practice it, bones are as precise as fingerprints. They record pressure, repetition, imbalance, neglect. They remember what the body endured long after names and faces are gone. Dr. Evelyn Carter spent the next 3 days listening. She began with microscopic analysis. Thin sections of bone were examined under magnification, revealing growth patterns and remodeling cycles. The healed rib fractures told her more than just timing. Their uneven repair suggested inconsistent medical care. The injuries had not been treated in a hospital. No surgical intervention, no perfect alignment. This woman had healed on her own. Evelyn cross-referenced the fracture healing timeline with age estimates. The earliest break likely occurred in the victim's early 20s. The most recent, less than a year before death. This wasn't a single event. It was a pattern. She was in a long-term abusive situation, Evelyn told Detective Hale during their briefing. Years, not months. Hale looked down at the photograph spread across the table. Can you tell who did it? Evelyn shook her head. Not yet. Bones tell us what happened to the body, not who held the weapon. But they can tell us how close the person was. She pointed to the skull injury. The angle suggests the attacker was facing her, close, same height or slightly taller. This wasn't a random strike. The next clue came from the legs. The femurs showed subtle asymmetry, not enough to be noticeable in life, but enough for Evelyn to recognize. The right leg bore more weight. The left had signs of chronic stress. She limped, she said. Not severely, but enough that it altered her gait. Hale frowned. From an injury? Possibly. Or from something she did repeatedly, standing, carrying weight, working long hours on her feet. The lab pulled fibers from soil samples taken near the burial site. Old cotton fragments, synthetic blends common in uniforms, nothing distinctive at first glance. But then a button surfaced. Plastic, cracked, industrial grade. Evelyn didn't smile often, but when she saw it, her eyes sharpened. This came from clothing, she said, not casual wear, work wear. The team widened the missing person's search parameters. Female, late 20s to early 30s, disappeared between 15 and 20 years ago. Possible history of domestic violence. Employment involving manual labor or service industry work. The list shrank. Then a name surfaced. Lena Morales. Reported missing 18 years earlier, 29 years old at the time. Lived 2 counties away from Red Hollow, worked at a roadside diner just off the old highway before it was rerouted. The same highway now being expanded. Her case file was thin, too thin. No suspects, no body, no follow-up beyond the first year. She'd been classified as a voluntary disappearance after her partner claimed she left town. Evelyn read the file twice. She never left, she said quietly. The photograph attached to the report showed a woman with tired eyes and a forced smile, long dark hair pulled back. Nothing about her screamed danger or drama or urgency, which was exactly the problem. Hale contacted Lena's remaining family. Her mother had passed years ago. A younger brother lived out of state. He answered the call in stunned silence. She wouldn't just disappear. She promised she'd never do that to our mom. The anthropology lab compared dental records. A match. Lena Morales had been lying beneath Red Hollow for nearly 2 decades. With a name came context. Police reopened the case officially, now reclassified as homicide. Detectives revisited Lena's last known address, a rented house near the diner. The property had changed hands twice since then, but records remained. Her partner at the time was listed as Daniel Rourke, 34 years old back then, construction foreman, no criminal record. He'd told police Lena left after an argument, said she took cash and clothes and vanished. At the time, no one pushed back. Evelyn reviewed photographs of Rourke. Tall, broad shoulders, right-handed. Same height range suggested by the cranial angle. Coincidence alone didn't convict anyone, but patterns didn't lie. The anthropology report grew thicker. Evelyn analyzed isotopes within the bone tissue, trace elements absorbed through food and water over time, geographic signatures. She lived locally her whole life, didn't travel, didn't relocate. Her bones reflect this region consistently, which meant Rourke's story about her leaving town was false, or at least incomplete. They searched for medical records. There were none documenting Lena's injuries, but co-workers at the diner remembered things. She wore long sleeves, one former waitress said. She bruised easy, said another. Evelyn listened to the interviews later, alone in her office. She didn't judge the people who hadn't acted. She'd seen this too many times. Violence hid in plain sight because it looked ordinary. The bones confirmed what the living hadn't wanted to see. Then came the most unsettling discovery. Evelyn examined the vertebrae more closely, focusing on the cervical spine. One vertebrae showed a slight compression fracture, old, non-lethal, but it wasn't alone. Several showed microfractures consistent with repetitive force, not from accidents, from restraint. Someone held her down, Evelyn concluded, often. Hale ran his hair through his hair. So this wasn't just one bad night. No, Evelyn said. This was a life lived under control. Police located Daniel Rourke within days. He lived 3 towns over now, married, 2 children, a respectable life on paper. When detectives interviewed him, he appeared calm, cooperative, even sympathetic. "That's terrible," he said when told Lena had been found. "I always wondered what happened to her." Evelyn watched the recording later. She noticed what others might miss. When Rourke spoke about Lena, he never used her name, only she or that girl, distance encoded in language. More importantly, he denied violence categorically, said they argued, yes, but never physical. The bones disagreed. Evelyn prepared to testify, but she wanted more. Anthropology could show injury, it could suggest patterns, but to build a case, they needed linkage. Then a breakthrough arrived from an unexpected source, the soil samples. Analysis revealed trace amounts of lime, not enough to preserve, not enough to destroy, just enough to mask scent, used often by people trying to prevent detection by animals. This wasn't a rushed burial, Evelyn said. He prepared. Hale revisited old property records. Rourke had worked on a drainage project near Red Hollow the year Lena disappeared. Heavy equipment, access, knowledge of soil composition. He would have known where to bury someone so they wouldn't be found. At least he thought he did. The case tightened like a noose, but Rourke still denied everything. Without a confession, without direct witnesses, the case rested heavily on Evelyn's work. She felt the weight of it. One misinterpretation, one overstated conclusion, and Lena would remain just another name reclaimed by silence. Evelyn returned to the bones one last time. She focused on the hands, on the small healed fracture, on the faint callousing where ligaments had once attached. Lena had resisted, not dramatically, not heroically, but persistently. Enough for her body to remember, enough for the truth to survive. And as Evelyn finalized her report, she knew the last chapter of this story wouldn't be written in a lab. It would be written in a courtroom, where bones would speak louder than words. Courtrooms are built for the living. They echo with voices, objections, arguments, and carefully constructed narratives. But on the morning the trial began, the most powerful witness in the room was someone who had been silent for nearly 20 years, Lena Morales. Her bones lay sealed in evidence boxes beneath the courtroom floor, cataloged and labeled, no longer anonymous. She had no voice, no memory, no family seated in the gallery to speak for her. What she had instead was science and Dr. Evelyn Carter. The prosecution opened with restraint. No theatrics, no emotional appeals, just facts. A woman disappeared, a body was found, evidence contradicted the story told for nearly 2 decades. Then Evelyn took the stand. She wore the same neutral expression she carried in the lab. No anger, no triumph, just certainty. Forensic anthropology, she began, is the study of the human skeleton in a legal context. Bones respond to life. They change with use, injury, and time. They do not lie, but they must be read carefully. She explained Lena's age estimation, the healed fractures, the asymmetrical gait. She described abuse without ever using the word. Multiple injuries, Evelyn said, healed at different times, no medical intervention, patterns consistent with repeated trauma over years. The defense objected. Speculation. The judge overruled. Evelyn moved to the skull. The fatal injury occurred from a blunt force impact to the left parietal region, she said. The angle suggests the assailant was standing close, facing the victim. She paused. This was not an accident. A diagram appeared on the screen, clean, clinical. Evelyn described restraint marks on the cervical vertebrae, microfractures invisible to the untrained eye. These indicate repeated compression, hands, arms, human force. The courtroom was silent. Then came the soil evidence. The remains were buried with the presence of lime, used to mask scent. This indicates planning. The defense tried to dismantle her conclusions piece by piece. Could the injuries have been caused by work accidents? Unlikely, Evelyn replied. The distribution and healing patterns do not align with occupational injury. Could the skull fracture have occurred after death? No, she said. The fracture shows signs of perimortem trauma. The bone responded as living tissue. Could someone else have done it? Evelyn did not answer that. That question, she said calmly, is not within my scope. I can only tell you what happened to her body. And her body told a story of violence, control, and proximity. The prosecution rested. The defense leaned heavily on absence. No eyewitnesses, no confession, no weapon recovered. They painted Daniel Rourke as a grieving former partner, unfairly targeted because he was the last person to see Lena alive. They reminded the jury that bones could not identify a killer. They were right. Bones did not name names, but they eliminated lies. Hale stood the stand next. He presented Rourke's original statement from 18 years earlier. Lena left voluntarily, took money, planned to start over. Then Evelyn's isotope analysis appeared on the screen. Her bones show no geographic relocation, Hale said. She never left this region. The diner employees testified. Long sleeves, bruises, excuses. Then came the construction records. Rourke's work assignment near Red Hollow during the exact period Lena disappeared. His access to heavy equipment. His familiarity with the land. Still, Rourke denied everything. On the stand, he spoke softly, carefully. She was troubled, he said. She talked about leaving all the time. The prosecution asked one question that changed the room. Why, the attorney asked, did you never report her missing? Rourke hesitated. "She told me not to, said she didn't want to be found." The bones contradicted him. People who plan to disappear don't accumulate years of untreated injuries. They don't die violently in shallow graves near their partner's worksite. The closing argument was brief. "This case," the prosecutor said, "is not about guessing who committed a crime. It's about listening to the only witness who never stopped telling the truth." The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, no one looked surprised. Guilty. Second-degree murder. Daniel Rourke was led away without looking back. No outburst, no breakdown, just silence. Evelyn did not attend the sentencing. She never did. Instead, she returned to the lab. She completed the final documentation, ensured Lena's remains would be released to her family for burial. Before the transfer, Evelyn stood alone with the evidence boxes. She had done her job, but the work left marks, even on those trained to observe without emotion. Bones told stories because someone took the time to listen. Most didn't. That was the real tragedy. Lena Morales was not unique. Evelyn knew that. For every case that reached a courtroom, dozens remained buried under misclassification, accidents that weren't, disappearances that were murders, deaths written off because they were inconvenient. Forensic anthropology did not solve crimes on its own, but it corrected history. It returned dignity. Months later, Evelyn received a letter from Lena's brother. He wrote about the funeral, about finally knowing where his sister had been, about anger, relief, and grief arriving all at once. He ended with a simple sentence: "Thank you for listening when no one else did." Evelyn folded the letter and placed it in her dresser drawer. She would not frame it, she would not display it, but she would remember it every time she stood over a skeleton, every time someone dismissed bones as silent. They were not. They remembered footsteps, hands, violence, work, love, fear. They remembered lives reduced to evidence. And as long as someone was willing to read them carefully, the dead would continue to speak. Not for revenge, but for truth.